This morning, first, I want to take a moment to thank our new lectors, both of our new lectors. Can we offer special thanks to our new lectors? Now, you can be a lector too. Did you know that? You can be a lector too. You may not do as good a job as Brooklyn did this morning for us, or as Christina did for us, but you can be a lector too. That's the message for today. If you want to be a lector, there is a place for you to do ministry in this church. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go along this morning. Now, if you were listening to the gospel reading and the words of Jesus were making you feel a little uncomfortable this morning, and you happen to be somebody who, like me, has been divorced and subsequently got married to another person, and you're feeling a little uncomfortable, what are we going to talk about? Where are we going with this gospel reading? I have got good news for you. We're going to talk about St. Francis of Assisi today. We're not going to talk about all that. Now, if you have a pastoral need to discuss what's going on in your life, you can contact me or one of our other members of the clergy, and we're happy to explore that gospel passage with you one-on-one. But we're not going to go there today. We're going to have some fun today. As we've noticed, we have lots of furry friends. I don't see any feathered friends with us today. We have had feathered friends. Somebody earlier this morning mentioned something about, she said the word doggies, but I heard her say donkeys. And are there donkeys coming? I mean, I guess it's okay as long as that person cleans up after the donkeys. Donkeys, to my knowledge, are not the cleanest of animals to be in a church space. But we are celebrating today the blessing of the animals, and I see a penguin here. So is it a penguin or a puffin? It's a puffin. I got corrected. That's a puffin. We do have a feathered friend here to be blessed. And why are we doing this? Well, because every year, this time of year, in the Franciscan communities, we celebrate what's called the Transitus on the evening of October 3rd, which is the night before the feast day of St. Francis. October 3rd, we celebrate the Transitus. And that word comes to us from Latin, and it means a transition from death into life. And the Franciscans celebrate every year when St. Francis, their spiritual brother, transitioned from death to life. And that's right in line with our Easter theology that we share as Christians. And in the minds of the Franciscans, Francis, if any of us were going to do that, Francis was a good person to do that, to transition from death into that eternal life. Now, we'll probably all get there. I like to think that we'll all get there, but it's also nice to have people we can look to as examples of who we want to maybe shape our lives after. And Francis, let's face it, is a pretty good person to look to if we want to shape our lives and we want to model our lives after somebody who has come before us. And now, Francis was a mystic. Okay? And a mystic is someone who kind of understands things on a different level. Have we met somebody in our lives who has some kind of wisdom that we don't know where it came from, and it's not the kind of wisdom or knowledge that you get from school or education? It's just I see some fingers pointing over here at Father Harry. I see some fingers pointing there. Now, Father Harry would, by the way, not agree with me if I said he was a mystic. And I think that's one of the rules of being a mystic, is if you say I'm a mystic, then you're automatically not, right? It's kind of like saying I'm humble. If I say I'm humble, guess what? I'm not humble. But there are people in our world who have that. They kind of on a different plane, and they have that wisdom and that knowledge. One of my mentor who when he died, his wife gave me this stole, this Celtic stole. I would call him a mystic. He would not call himself a mystic, but I would call him a mystic because he just would have these tidbits of wisdom, and you think, where did that come from? And it's because he kind of was on a different level, a different plane. And Francis was one of those people, and he founded the Franciscan order. Now, there's 3 levels of Franciscan orders. There's the first order Franciscans, which are the men who take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And they often live together in community, in monasteries. They may or may not be ordained. They don't have to be. Sometimes they're brothers, right? Those are the first order Franciscans. And then we have the second order Franciscans, who are the sisters of St. Clare. St. Clare was a disciple of Francis, and so the women who belong to that order are the second order Franciscans. And then there are the tertiary Franciscans, the third order Franciscans. And that's for everyone else who maybe wants to emulate Francis in their lives, but they don't really feel called to make those vows, right? And so there are a lot of third order Franciscans. And my grandmother was a third order Franciscan, and I knew she was during her lifetime, but I didn't know she had a Franciscan habit. She was actually buried in her Franciscan habit. I had never seen her wear the habit until she was in her casket at her funeral, and she was buried in her Franciscan habit. Okay. Now, these habits, we all know the habits. We've seen Franciscans. We've seen Franciscan friars. You see the San Diego Padres who are in the playoffs right now. Their mascot wears a Franciscan habit, right? The habit stands out today, doesn't it? If somebody were in this room wearing a brown Franciscan habit, that person would stand out in today's world. But in the days of Francis, that was simple clothing. Francis began his life very wealthy, and he gave away a lot of his wealth, much to his wealthy father's chagrin. Okay, and he started this order where he lived in poverty, and he dressed as if he were in poverty, and he encouraged his followers to dress as if they were in poverty. So if you saw somebody in Franciscan garb back in the days of Francis, you wouldn't have thought anything of it. You would have thought that's a poor person. Now it kind of stands out for a different reason, but the intention is that it wasn't supposed to stand out. It was supposed to help them to blend in with people who didn't have much. Okay? And the Franciscans have a number of what we call charisms, ways that they live into their ministry. And one of those is sharing the gospel. We sometimes hear about Franciscans that they preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words. Right? They preach the gospel through the way that they live. And from my point of view, from my perspective, I would say that the Franciscans are some of the best evangelicals that we have. Okay? And I know that word is loaded, isn't it? That word evangelical or evangelism, that makes us Episcopalians uncomfortable. Okay? Now, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news, but we happen to have an election season in full swing right now. Did anybody know that? I don't know if you knew that. If you're following the news, maybe you might have heard. Okay? And you know that one of the groups of voters that political candidates tend to target are what they like to call evangelicals. Okay? Now, what do we mean when we hear that word, evangelical? Okay? I think it's important to break down that word. Okay? Because that word comes to us from Greek, evangelical or evangelism. And today, in the United States, we often associate that word with theologically conservative American Christians. Right? That's who that word is targeting when we listen to the news and we say this candidate's targeting evangelical voters with this message. Right? That's usually what we're talking about, but that's not what the word means. Okay? If we think about the word, we call it parsing. When we break down a Greek word, figure out what it means, and we know that it starts. The Greek word for evangelism is euangelion. Euangelion, and if we parse it, we notice that the first couple of letters of the word EU, and that gives us our words in English for euphemism, or euphoria, or Eucharist. How about that? How about Eucharist? It means good, right? So we know that there's good in there. And euangelion kind of sounds like angel, doesn't it? That's where we get our word angel, and that means message. So an angel is a messenger. Evangelion is a good message or good news. And so evangelism or evangelicalism means sharing the good news. Okay? So you and I are called to be evangelicals. Did you know that? We are called to be evangelicals, and we are called to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Okay? And I think it's important to be discerning about what we mean when we use that term, because I think we Episcopal Christians, we Episcopalians, we can take that word back because we're called to be evangelicals. Okay? And when I think of Francis, I think of a guy who truly loved Jesus and who truly wanted to make the world a better place. And it wasn't, by the way, for his own benefit. It wasn't for his own benefit. And sometimes it was even at his own expense. And I think we've all done this in certain ways. Maybe we don't realize it, but we all do this. Have you ever been out to, let's say a fancy Italian meal, right, with somebody we're dining with, right? And they bring out the best tasting pasta dish you've ever had in your life. You've had a similar situation where you've had a meal that just tasted so amazing, right? And if you're dining with somebody, what do you always do? You offer that person a taste of your meal, right? Now, you're technically missing out on one taste of your meal, at least one taste, right? It's at your own expense, but we still share that bite of that meal because we want to share that goodness with the person we're dining with, right? It's a good feeling to be able to share what we have, even though it costs a little bit for ourselves, right? We still get to share that with somebody else. And so that's the kind of life that Francis would live. And that's a metaphor for what it means to be evangelical. We're sharing something good, even if it means we give of ourselves to do it. Okay? Now, there are a lot of ways to think about that word, evangelical. But I like to think of Francis's way of being an evangelical. I don't like to think of evangelical in a sense where it takes away our autonomy, right? Or it encourages us to maybe somebody says, hey, Father Tim, you got to do this and this and this, otherwise you're not a good Christian, right? I prefer Francis's style of evangelicalism, where maybe I might look to that person and say, wow, I like the way that person's living their life. I want to be like that person, right? But I get to decide for myself. And Francis taught autonomy. He taught autonomy. And he offered his love and his kindness to all the people of the world, but not only all the people, all the animals. I mean, we have lots of animals here today because Francis loved all God's creatures, and he demonstrated love for all God's creatures. And that's why we bless animals on St. Francis's feast day. Okay? And we practice that evangelicalism, that evangelism, in the way Francis does. And there are so many Franciscans who follow in Francis's footsteps, who we look to as examples of how we might want to live our lives, or we might want to learn from them. Have we heard of somebody, Father Richard Rohr? We heard of Father Richard Rohr? Anybody? Hands? So a few of us have heard of Richard Rohr. Richard Rohr is a Franciscan, and we've heard of maybe Saint Padre Pio from Italy, right? He was a Franciscan. Anthony of Padua, a Franciscan. Mary Yanni, my grandmother, Franciscan. Lots of wonderful Franciscans. Okay? Now, the current pope is a Jesuit, right? But he also admired the Franciscan way of life so much that he took on the name Francis after St. Francis because he admired the message that St. Francis taught during his lifetime. St. Francis is probably among our most beloved saints in the Christian church. Okay. And Francis made a difference in the world, and he continues to make a difference in the world. And it wasn't because he limited what people could do, but because he empowered people to be who they are called to be. So when we leave today, I want us to remember to be like Francis, to be an evangelical. And let's take that word back and we share the good news. We share the love of God in the world. We share the good news of love and of kindness and the good news of caring for all God's people and all God's creatures, and the good news of respecting the dignity of every human person. So when you leave here today, go out into the world. Be an evangelical. Share the gospel at all times, and only when necessary, use words. Amen.